Welcome to this Meet the Funder session with Wiltshire Community Foundation. Today we are very pleased to be telling you about our Police and Crime Commissioner Community Action Fund grants, and we have Rob here from the Police and Crime Commissioner Office who's going to tell us more about the fund and the criteria and the priorities and what they're looking to achieve with that. And then I will talk to you more about the sort of technical bits about the eligibility criteria for groups, how you apply, and sort of talk through what a strong application would look like as well. So hopefully you'll find it an interesting session. So without further ado, I will hand over to Rob Llewellyn, and I will start sharing our slides. Oh, sorry, get that there. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. First of all, can everyone see the slides? Just making sure from a technical perspective, seeing some nods. Fantastic, great stuff. So good morning, everybody. As Karen said, I'm Rob Llewellyn. I'm the Director of Operations at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Thank you all very much for taking the time this morning to join this Meet the Funder event. What I wanted to do is just take us through a bit about the fund, why we've established it, and its key sort of aims, and then happy to take any questions when we come to the end. So as I go through, I'll do my best Chris Whitty impression by asking for the next slide, please. So the Community Action Fund, what we are interested in providing is grants of up to £5,000 for a year. One of the things that we are really keen to do, though, is make this as simple and as easy as possible for groups to access it. We're conscious that there's a range of groups that might be interested in this fund, and therefore what we want to avoid is having to cause people lots of effort and stress in developing their bids. There'll be some requirements which Karen will talk through, but what we wanted to do is make sure there's multiple points through the year where people can apply for funding. So what we're looking to do is a quarterly decision point where we'll be seeking applications from interested groups and looking for applications around a particular set of priorities. You can see them listed there, but what I'll do, I'll wait for my slide in a second to sort of go through those in more detail. But effectively, those three priorities are three of the four priorities within the Police and Crime Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan, which is sets out the priorities for both our office and Wiltshire Police, and the way in which we work with a range of partners to improve community safety, reduce offending and tackle crime across Wiltshire and Swindon. Next slide, please, Karen. So in terms of the Community Action Fund, this fund comes from the Police Property Act. So where the police are recovering property from criminal investigations, or indeed where lost property is handed in and there is no identified owner, after a period of time, that property is then auctioned off in order to raise funds, and those funds can be used for charitable purposes. So there's very clear legislation around how that is operated. So what we've done is this year we've made available £80,000 into the Community Action Fund, and as I've mentioned already, we'll be looking to distribute that at 4 points through the year in packages of up to £5,000. What we are clearly interested in, though, is where applications can really evidence that link to the Police and Crime Plan priorities. Next slide, please, Karen. So what are those priorities? Now, the first thing, those eagle-eyed amongst you will spot that there are three priorities there, 1, 3 and 4. Priority 2 is all about tackling serious harm and violence, which is very much a core policing sort of priority. So it's not really relevant for this fund, hence why it's not listed on this slide. But the three priorities that are listed, the first one is really about ensuring that we have a police service that meets the needs of its communities. Now, for a lot of that activity, that's mostly focused on our office and the police service itself. But the one I would highlight is the priority that's listed under that is increasing public confidence and trust, policing engagement with our communities. So that's a particular area. We know from some of the horrendous cases nationally, confidence in policing is a real challenge. And so we are particularly interested in areas and opportunities and projects where we can increase that confidence and that trust with communities and that relationship between policing and the people that they serve. So that's something I wanted to particularly highlight this morning. Moving on to the middle one there, listed priority 3, which is tackling crimes that matter most to local communities. So for us, that's really around particularly antisocial behaviour, which we know is always a challenge, but particularly through the summer months of the year with good weather, we often see a rise in antisocial behaviour. Road safety is a particular concern we know of communities locally, right across whether that's rural or indeed urban conurbations throughout the force area. And then we've got listed there rural crime and heritage crime. Given the geographical nature of our force area, rural crime and heritage crime is a particular challenge. And more broadly, fraud, cybercrime and hate crime. I don't know how much sort of people know about the size of the sort of the fraud risk across nationally, but actually fraud crime is a really significant challenge for policing nationally, and particularly affects vulnerable people in our communities. So interested if there are projects out there that are interested in tackling or helping to support the work that the police are doing tackling fraud and cybercrime. And then the final priority, priority 4, improving the experience of victims and delivering justice. So this really is what I would call not core policing, but sort of the activities supporting the criminal justice system. So caring for victims, supporting tackling mental health, improving the effectiveness and efficiency of the criminal justice system, particularly around restorative justice, which is a really vital part of our criminal justice system, and also reducing reoffending, which ultimately is always the goal. What we want to see is interventions and support to help tackle reducing reoffending, to ensure that actually we are reducing crime overall. So next slide, please. So I've talked about sort of the priorities within the police and crime plan and what they mean. Really, what does that tangibly mean for organisations and projects in terms of this fund? Well, what we're really interested in is activity that is targeted around prevention and early intervention. So where we can tackle problems before they become criminal, if you like. So working with, whether that's working with young people, whether that's working with substance people that suffer from substance addictions and those sorts of challenges. That's at one end of the spectrum. The other end is actually that reducing reoffending aspect I've just talked about. So actually where people have offended, how can we help and support them to ensure that they don't fall back into the criminal justice system, and therefore reduce demand on all our policing and indeed improve outcomes for communities. So at the front end is that prevention and early intervention, and at the back end it's really around that reducing reoffending. Ultimately, this is all about changing behaviour. That's one aspect. The other aspect we're really interested in is that community engagement. I've touched on it already, but really, how can we strengthen relationships between the community and the police that they serve? So really interested to hear from projects that are looking to tackle that. Now you can see on the slide examples of relevant work, and I'm happy to answer particular questions around each of those. The one thing I would add though is we're really interested to hear, innovation, new ideas, where perhaps people are keen to try new things, recognizing we want to evaluate and see evidence of how some of this work will be delivered, but we are also very, very keen to hear new ideas. We don't just want to do things we've always done. So if there is the nucleus of an idea out there that you're interested in talking to us about, we are very keen to hear about it. And I think that's the other bit for me. This event is really important about building relationships with you as a group of interested bodies. And we're really keen to have further engagement with you if that is helpful. So even after this, if you've asked some questions today, but you want a further conversation with us, we're happy to facilitate that. And we look forward to working with you. Karen, I think that's enough from me. So I'll hand over to you for sort of the more technical aspects, if that's okay.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Rob. So yes, we'll be able to take some more questions shortly, but I was just going to run through the basic criteria for groups to apply. This is very similar to our usual criteria. So those groups, I can see quite a lot of groups who will be quite familiar with us already. So hopefully this won't be new to you, but just to confirm, I seem to have lost my ability. Oh, there we go. Got it back now. There we are. So in terms of the types of groups that can apply to this fund, You can be a constituted voluntary or community organisation. You can be a registered charity, and you can also be a not-for-profit company, including community interest companies. But as ever, we would say that the majority of directors for any not-for-profit company would need to receive no payment from the company, so i.e. operating very similar to a charity. In terms of your location, this is a local fund. So as ever, our criteria would be that you need to be a local or regional organisation, either only working in Wiltshire or Swindon or in the south or southwest of England. And the people that benefit from the project that you're applying for obviously need to live within Wiltshire and Swindon, even if you do work in other areas. For national organisations, we can't take out applications for nationally based and operating organisations, but if you are a local branch of a national organisation and you have your own management committee based in Wiltshire or Swindon and your own bank account, then we could accept an application as a sort of separate part of a larger organisation. Again, most of you will be familiar with the fact that your organisation will need to have an active voluntary management committee, either trustees or directors, with at least 3 people, and those people cannot be related to each other or in a long-term relationship or living at the same address. And then in terms of the financial arrangements you would need to have in place, you'd definitely need to have your own bank account with at least 2 signatories. Again, they can't be related to each other. You would need to evidence that you have less than 12 months running costs in your unrestricted reserves. We will take into consideration designated reserves, and obviously we'll have a look at what your restricted reserves are, but you need to have less than 12 months running costs in unrestricted, freely available reserves. Ideally, we would see some form of financial record or accounts, depending on obviously the size of the organisation, how complex they will be. But we would need to be able to see what your income, expenditure, and again, what your reserves are. We're sort of increasingly looking at evidence of financial planning for the year. So if you have a budget, again, can be quite simple for small organisations, or it might be more complex if you're a larger organisation. Some sort of budget or financial plan that just would help us easily see where the grant would fit in with your other fundraising and income and expenditure for the year. A recent bank account, that's just so that we know we've got your up-to-date bank details if you are awarded a grant, but also obviously evidence that you have a bank account in the name of the organisation. We would need to see some form of constitution. So even if you're not a registered charity, you need to have some form of constitution that governs how you operate, how your committee or your trustees run the organisation, how you make decisions, and what your arrangements are if the organisation were to fold. And then we do particularly look for safeguarding and equalities policy. So we want to know that you have things in place to run the organisation well, but we're particularly interested in safeguarding and equality policy, so that we know that you're making your services accessible to all people within the community, and that you're doing so safely, and that you're working with children and any adults at risk, whether they be people that you are supporting or they be your volunteers or your staff, that you're doing that safely. If you are a very small organisation and you don't have some of those things in place, then do contact us. We can talk that through with you. And if you are very, very new or very, very small, it might be that you can apply through another organisation that is constituted and could support your application. Oh, sorry, it's not letting me. There we go. So just to clarify the application process, this should be pretty familiar and fairly straightforward, but the first thing we obviously would always recommend is that you read through the criteria on the web page and sort of think through particularly the priorities that Rob's just gone through and how that fits with your project or the work of your organisation. We have an online application form. We have a new system that we've just had installed, so it will look different to other applications you've completed you know, if you've completed applications with us before, it will look slightly different, but should basically be the same process that you complete it online. You can go backwards and forwards to it, you know, save it and return to it, and then submit it when it's finished. Do obviously contact us at the office if there's any issues with accessing the application form. We would complete our usual eligibility checks, and then generally we speak to all applicants about their project and their requirements, and we can sort of clarify or add any information and write a short briefing note to go with your application to the panel meeting. And as Rob said, we're aiming to have 4 panel meetings during the year, so they'll look at a small number of applications at each panel meeting. We're looking at sort of June and September being the first 2, just to give you an idea of when you might want to get applications in. We usually have to have a sort of cut-off point several weeks before a panel, because obviously we need time to do all the checks and having the conversations and prepare the paperwork ready for panel. And then after the panel, we will send out decision letters via email, so people know what the outcome is, whether they've been successful or not, and obviously we'd aim to give some feedback for those that are not successful. Then you have obviously your period of delivery. So the grants are awarded for a period of 12 months. And so you have that time to run the project or the service that you want to run. And then we would be looking for an end of grant report. So we would aim to make the questions available so that you know what you need to be collecting in order to report at the end. So hopefully that will be more meaningful and helpful for your reporting. And then just finally, I wanted to just give you a little overview of the questions that are on the application form, so that we can point out a few things that would strengthen an application. So we've got a question on there about your management committee or trustees. It's just really helpful for us to have that overview of how you operate. As for every question, we would recommend being brief and concise. You do not need to give us, you know, lots and lots of detail. We just want to know the real basics, you know, how you operate, how often do you meet, you know, what sort of skills have you got on your management committee and trustees. It's helpful to understand the overall aims and objectives of your organisation. Again, just your core things. You don't need to list everything that you do. Just give us a flavour for what your focus is within the communities that you serve. Clearly, we would want a description of the project or activity that you want to apply for. It's really helpful for you to be as specific as possible with that. So, you know, if you're running a support group, for example, say how often you will meet, where you're going to meet, how many people you expect to be there, how are you going to staff it, would it be volunteers or paid staff, you know, that sort of thing. Just as much clear detail as possible, but again, as concise as possible. We will ask you about the main beneficiaries, what are their circumstances, what are their needs. We will also, you know, a key question is which of the fund priorities will you be addressing through this work and how, and this is where the evidence comes in. So it may be that you have anecdotal evidence, feedback from people. It may be that you actually collect some statistics around the number of people that you support and the type of issues you've been able to, you know, help them with. You know, if you're working with young people, you know, have you managed to divert them from antisocial behaviour, for example? You know, there's all sorts of things that you might want to include in there, but you know, it's fine to use a sort of brief case study or anything that sort of gives the panel an indication of how you're intending to address the priorities of the fund. And then obviously we'd like to know how you're actually going to sort of monitor that to make sure you do achieve those outcomes. So again, are you going to use some sort of entry and exit questionnaire? Are you going to gather feedback from people? You know, presumably you sort of gather information about who you have reached during that time, some basic sort of demographics, for example. So just a sense of how you know you're going to, achieve what you set out to achieve. And then we would just ask you, do you have experience of running this type of work? Again, just a really brief overview. It might be that you're applying for something that you've done for years and you do really well, so you just need to say that. Or it might be a new project. It might be something that you haven't done before, and that's okay too. But what is it that makes you confident you're able to work in that area and do that project? So it's just helpful to get that, and gives panels confidence that the work that's going to be done is in safe hands. And then we will ask you just again to briefly explain to us how you manage safeguarding and equalities within the organisation and the project. So how you're going to make sure that it is a safely operated service or project, and how you're going to make sure it's as inclusive as possible across all the different sort of strands in terms of sort of disability, gender, race, religion, sexuality, etc. So we just want to make sure that things are as open as possible. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a steer on what would make a strong application. Obviously we are open to questions, and I think, yeah, I've just put up the slide that has got our contact details at the foundation. So we would be the initial point of contact if we feel there needs to be a sort of further discussion with the Police and Crime Commissioner office, and obviously we can forward that on. But we are always happy to chat through a proposal before you start an application, because we know how much work goes into an application. So if you're unsure about eligibility or whether the project fits with the fund priorities, then do give us a call and we'll try to guide you on that. So you can either ring us or email us. And obviously I've put our website there as well, because there is some obviously information about the fund there too. And then I